بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله. أكرر الترحيب بالجميع، وبداية أشكر الغرفة التجارية في جدة واللجنة المكاتب الهندسية على استضافتهم لهذا اللقاء الأول لفرع الجمعية السعودية للعمران في دورتها الجديدة لهذا العام، ومجلس إدارة جديد. وانتهز الفرصة هذه لتقديم الشكر الجزيل للدكتور عبد العزيز الدوسري رئيس الجمعية، والدكتور بليلة الرئيس السابق لفرع الجمعية السعودية للعمران بجدة، اللي اليوم ما سنحت له الفرصة يكون معنا لانشغاله في عمله الجديد في المدينة كمستشار فني لجامعة طيبة. إن شاء الله تصير فرصة قريب يقوم بالتكريم اللائق لي بإذن الله. أنتهز برضو الفرصة هذه اليوم يشاركونا في هذا اللقاء ضيوف أتوا من الرياض، أخ خالد والأخ فهد من شعبة كونت حديثة في جمعية علوم العمران في الرياض، تعنى بتصميم المستشفيات والتخطيط لها. راح أعطيهم الكلمة لثلاث دقائق للتعريف بالملتقى اللي راح يقام إن شاء الله من تنظيمهم في مارس القادم. أرحب كذلك، تفضل مهندس خالد، أرحب كذلك بالاستشاري مكتب زيدلر الكندي، وأشكرهم على قبولهم للدعوة. وأعتقد أنه هذا نهج يعني لابد أن يحتذى، أنه الاستشاريين اللي يعملوا في تصميم مشاريع في البلد هنا أنه ننتهز فرصة تواجدهم إحنا كمختصين وكعاملين في هذا القطاع، أنه ندعوهم لملتقيات من هذا القبيل للارتقاء والتعريف المستجدات اللي تطرأ على القطاعات المختلفة الهندسية وأنواع وأصناف المشاريع المختلفة. الإخوان في مكتب زيدلر حصلوا أو فازوا بعقد تصميم المستشفى الجديد، الجامع الجديد في جامعة الملك عبد العزيز، عبارة عن مستشفى حوالي 1200 سرير، والحمد لله وفقوا اليوم أنهم أخذوا الاعتماد الأولي على المشروع الابتدائي. فإن شاء الله يكون عرضهم يتضمن بعض يعني بعض الملامح عن هذا المشروع اللي اليوم الحمد لله يعني برضه نبارك لهم ونهنيهم على حصولهم على الموافقة على المشروع. لا نطيل عليكم، أشكر حضوركم جميعا وأتمنى إن شاء الله الاستفادة للجميع. بس خالد تفضل.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. أول شيء شاكرين للإخوان إعطاء الفرصة هذه. إحنا بعد ما سمعنا بالندوة، طبعا إحنا حريصين على حضور زي الندوات هذه اللي تنصب في مجال تخصصنا. حبيت أعطيكم فكرة سريعة عن الشعبة هذه. هي بداية من حوالي 8 شهور مهندسين معماريين متخصصين في المستشفيات واهتماماتهم في المستشفيات تجمعنا وحاولنا نسوي زي اتحاد ما بيننا بحيث نتبادل الخبرات، نتبادل المعلومات. وبالفعل انبثقت منها لجنة تأسيسية، وبدينا في الإجراءات إلى أن أخذنا الموافقة الحمد لله، وصارت هي شعبة منبثقة من جمعية علوم العمران، مسمى الشعبة شعبة معماريين المباني الصحية، وأهدافها زيادة الوعي للمهتمين في المجال هذا، وتبادل الخبرات ما بينهم بحيث يتم إنشاء جيل من المهتمين في تصميم المستشفيات. والحمد لله أخذنا موافقة وزير الصحة أن حضور ملتقى اللي حيكون من 21 إلى 23 ربيع الأول، اللي هو يوافق من 3 إلى 5 مارس من السنة هذه إن شاء الله. فهذا بيكون في الملتقى هذا تعريف بالشعبة، وبرضه بداية لتحقيق أهدافها، جزء من أهدافها. وحرصنا من عرفنا بالملتقى هذا انه برضه تكون هذا يعتبر اول ملتقى شبه يعني بالحشد هذا اللي نعطيكم الخبر عنه. فحرصنا انه يعني ينتشر الخبر، لانه عارفين انكم مهتمين في موضوع تصميم المستشفيات، وهالموضوع هذا يهمكم. وبرضه احنا حناخذ عناوينكم اللي انحطت هنا بحيث نتواصل احنا وياكم، بحيث نعطيكم اي اخبار او اي معلومات تستجد في الملتقيات القادمه، او اي محاضرات، لان حتصير من هنا الى الملتقى حتصير في محاضرات زي هذه، بحيث ينتشر الوعي بين المهتمين في هالمجال. وانا كوني ضيف ما بطول اكثر من اللازم.
شكرا. طيب اذا ننقل الكلمه للمستشارين الكرام. مهندس طارق، floor is yours. المكتب الاستشاري, if you could start with introducing Zaidna and yourselves.
Yes.
Would you please? And the floor is yours. Go ahead.
Good evening. My name is Tarek Khatib. I'm the senior partner at Zaidna, and really run the design in the firm. And I have with me here my partner, Jürgen Henze, who's also a co-designer. And we work in a large studio in our office, actually taking care of some of the projects that we're seeing here today. We're very fortunate because we are here working on King Abdulaziz University and the hospital. And today really marked a very good day for us because we essentially were at the end of the conceptual phase of the project, and we're very proud, and we think that it's going very well. Just in general about Zeiler, we didn't come trying to tell you about Zeiler, but just to give you a feeling of in a few words. We're kind of a small, big firm. And the reason why I say that is because we don't want to grow to such a point that you lose control over the work. So we feel that we're very happy at 260 people around the world. Our main office is in Toronto, where all the intellectual work is done. We have an office in the States. We have 2 other offices in Canada in the West. We have Berlin, London, and 3 offices in China. And we've opened an office in Abu Dhabi. And now we are working towards building a relationship in Saudi Arabia, and we're really eager to see that. So we try to stay small, and in order to have some great control over the work that we do. And the senior people are the people that work on it. We don't have tiers in the office where people sell projects and people do projects. So Jürgen and I, while we're involved in the administration of the office, we're actually sitting and designing all the work. So that's what's different about us. So today's presentation is divided into 2 sections. The first one addresses, in generalities, issues to do with healthcare planning today. And rather than getting into very specific technical details about all the issues in planning, we decided to kind of give you an overview of how some of these larger issues affect buildings as we do them. And the second stage is a little bit more of a variety of work that we see how time permits, that show large-scale works, and all those works that you will see in the second section are either built or under construction, not proposals. So we try to keep them kind of more realistic to get a sense of how a firm actually works. So we will, it may be unusual, but in our presentation we've created interchange, so it's not just one person speaking, but we're all kind of going to do it together and pick on each other's points and so forth.
Now, you might wonder what this means, right? It's pretty obvious, I think, to architects and so on. But a little background. Currently, there's an ever-growing body of research that's being done, particularly in the United States and in Canada, which is called evidence-based design, or EBD, so we call it short. And what it is studies that have been conducted over the last 20 years that actually scientifically prove that the built environment has a direct effect on patient outcomes. In other words, patients are staying a shorter period of time in the hospital, and they're taking fewer drugs and so on. So that is now, there's all kinds of detailed studies that have to do with daylighting and lighting and color and spatial expression and so on that is out there. So we're going to show you some examples from our own work that follows that kind of thinking. And not only that, about 20 years ago, we were actually fortunate enough to kind of kickstart this movement because we built the Walter C. Mackenzie Hospital in Edmonton. And because it was built in 2 stages, we at one point ended up, this is an 800-bed hospital, we ended up with a new section which was 400 beds, and the old section, which we couldn't tear down until the 2nd stage, was still standing. So we were able to do a direct comparison of how the patients fared. And even 20 years ago, the results showed that the patients in the new building took fewer pain-killing drugs because they didn't want them anymore. And they recovered fast. They went home earlier. And that, people started building on. There's like so many studies out there now, very detailed, that prove that. There's no doubt about it.
So this first project is the Jurabinsky Hospital. We just basically opened it almost 6 months ago. It's an addition to an existing hospital. Most of those hospitals are not greenfield sites. There's only a few of them that actually are built from scratch. So the complexity in this one is having to build the first phase, which is a rather large project, and still make sense of how to connect to the existing hospital as well. And here you're seeing a view of the roundabout, and essentially this is what we call a drop-off. It's not as large. The wayfinding spaces within the hospital themselves are very important. As you come in, the idea of orientation has to be very clear. A sense of where you are at all times in relation to where you're going is a very important tool in how to navigate people through hospitals. Science will play a big role, but it's important that the spaces themselves explain movements first and foremost. And you can see here that there is a lot of attention to detail. There is this feeling in the way that you make hospital spaces is that you break down the sense of the institutionalized interiors and really create a sense of home for some of these people that spend hours and hours there. And so the idea being is that rather than seeing the hospital as just a bland space, it's a series of very activated centers so that as you get into one or the other, there's a sense of character that changes from department to department.
And before you go on, the slide on your right isn't actually an example of how we treat waiting areas. In other words, they become more like living rooms. They're reduced in size and broken up, and the furniture is quite comfortable and nice. So you don't get these sort of things like you find in airports or railway stations or whatever, right? So that makes people feel more comfortable, and we always thinking how to reduce stress in the hospital because ultimately it is a stressful place for the family and the patients.
Another hospital, what's interesting about this one is the interplay between the outdoor spaces and the indoor spaces and how they flow into one another, so you avoid having a front door to the building itself. And again, the wayfinding spaces are very important in the sense not only horizontally but vertically in being able to create a very important and clear connection throughout the building, as well as to encourage movement so that people don't just take elevators but allow for a fun way to actually move up and down and use your body from time to time during the day. And also to intersperse these vertical spaces with sitting areas and so forth to actually keep animating these strips.
I think you get a sense of all these slides. There's a very focused direction of the quality of the materials in these designs, and all high quality material, particularly in the public spaces.
So this was, so you can see here how even waiting areas for certain clinics are exposed so that there's this kind of back and forth visual connections between the different aspects of the hospital. This is we've done the new Sick Children's Hospital in Toronto, but hospitals change constantly, so literally, within a couple of years, a department might want a different thing, they bring a new machine. So we have to constantly
conditioning.
Actually, we're hoping that this hospital will move towards what we refer to as a LEED gold. So we're going to try to bring up some sustainable technologies and try to make that actually as well. So ambulatory care centers, these are essentially clinics for day patients as standalone facilities, and they are a kind of a new breed of hospitals. We see a lot of them cropping up in North America because they're trying to separate different flows of patients from acute hospitals to something that is a little bit less. So even emergency departments in such things are not called emergency department, they're called urgent care. So the idea is that you don't channel everybody who's sick to one particular institution, but you actually split it into step-down institutions that are dealing with less critical patients than the ones, and kind of create a different flow.
So if you sprain your ankle or something, you don't go to the hospital, right? You go to one of these facilities. Right? So they don't want you there, they want you.
Yeah, it creates better flow. So this is one of the projects that we're currently working on. It's a big master plan, which includes a hospital, but then also includes partnering buildings by the hospital with outside partners that will bring in ambulatory care facilities and doctors' offices and so on.
And the program is, as you can see by the name, it's geared more towards health and wellness rather than sickness, what we call pseudogenic design right now. So there's a lot of programs in these that are geared to educate people of actually how to keep well and make the right decisions in their life.
So it's more like, if one can characterize it as a community center for health. So essentially it encourages people to go, aside from seeing their doctor, there'd be educational programs and so forth. So it's actually promoting not getting sick, as opposed to being sick and curing the sickness.
There's a recent study that it was actually shocking to me. Somebody did a study of all people who were in the hospital quite sick, and they found out that almost 80% of those people, the reason they actually got sick was because of their own lifestyle choices. They didn't have some strange disease that was inherited or something, but it's the things they did to themselves that were, in their lives, like smoking, whatever, right?
This is an interesting project that we're just now starting to build. We finished the construction drawings, and it's small, but it's very intriguing. It's a breast screening cancer clinic for women, and it's in an existing building next to the hospital that we first showed you when we first started the project. But again, this whole idea of health, this whole idea of worrying about the psychology of the patient that comes to something like this and the things that they're going through their mind, how to alleviate the stress, how to create a warm and sort of friendly environment that is able to kind of get them through these difficult times are all related to how these things are designed. And so how even the patient waits while the nurse is actually escorting them into some of the dressing gowns and the clinics themselves that have to be, where procedures are done, is all part of the way we've looked at the design of the space. We've encircled the whole waiting area with a Japanese garden to create a kind of a visual kind of music for these people to actually alleviate the stress. It's very much like a house too. There is a kitchen counter, you can make coffee, you know, and there's a fireplace because we get snow. So this whole idea is to promote, I mean, these people may have something wrong, or they think they do, or they do have. So in all cases, there is a lot of stress. So, I mean, it just happened to be for women, but I think that whole ideology of reducing stress and creating kind of a salutogenic environment is part of the way we actually work.
This part, if you please. Sorry. This part is for waiting.
Yeah, this is the reception area for waiting, and most of the part you wait a lot here until you're actually escorted to the gowning area. So you know, there's a, you know, depending on the flow during the day, it could be really stressful just sitting there and you're saying, I really want to know, I really want to know. Yeah.
What about the patient?
So the patient areas, we didn't want to show you, but it's a very large clinic. And this whole feeling, the way we treated it, goes into it and just continues through. I mean, we just didn't want to go into too much detail into this project. So hospitals as the cornerstone of healthcare campuses, and you'll see, we've done a series of master plans, and you know, funny thing in North America, a lot of there's a lot of new hospitals, but a lot of them are existing campuses, and they are 25, 30 years old, and they're already in need for updates or complete replacement. The expansion areas are very important, and so the government really creates a series of steps to actually have the hospital board study how they will grow over 25 and then 100 years. And so we do a lot of these master plans before you actually get to the real work. So it's kind of studies on how you can add to it, how you can decommission whole buildings, and so on, and how to change the whole campus environment. Because in this building, the beige building in the 70s was the building, and there was parking lot all around it. That's what there is today. And what we've done with all the white buildings is intervene, create new buildings, create gardens and connections between them, and solve the parking in such a way that it turns into a healthcare campus as opposed to a mall with a sea of parking, which uses a different mentality about it. And also to work with the edges of the site of the hospital so that it integrates really well with the urban environment. So it's not just like an island, but actually a place, a village where you can actually go, and there are all kinds of different programs that would happen. This is another one that we're doing also, and the building that crosses over is an ambulatory care center, and it's got an expansion piece, which is the white piece, over the next 25 years. Behind, there is a small patient tower and a technical platform for ER and diagnostics, as well as for operating rooms. But the three buildings onto the left are all new partners that would come in, and so the whole area then again transforms itself into a kind of a healthcare campus, and these both are in Toronto. Now, centers of excellence means technology, really. Jürgen, you want to talk about this one?
Oh, and also means that, you know, you're creating hospitals that specialize, right? This is, for instance, a hospital we did in Germany, and it's basically just heart only. And a doctor actually just opened this hospital by himself. So it's a completely specialty hospital, and you can get that for heart, you can get that for, obviously, it's just another view of the same hospital. This is a very large cancer hospital in Toronto that we built some years ago, and it replaced an older facility that was quite outdated. So all the new technology is now here. But it's only cancer. That's the inside of that hospital. There are 2 atriums because it's so tall, because the site is very urban and restricted. And one of them is the clinic atrium on the left. And then above it is a large research component, because they do a lot of research right in that same building. And it's a teaching hospital too, so you get, you have teaching, research, and patient treatment all in one building, under one roof.
That glass floor you see here essentially brings light through
to the other In this case, it's a specialty hospital for mental illness, 300-bed hospital in Hamilton, Ontario. And again, it's you can see, obviously, you can see the beds in these little crucifix shapes. In the middle is, so we call those houses. In the middle is what we call the neighborhood. These are sort of the areas that the patients go to during the day for, interviews, for treatment, and so on. And in the front bar, that is the more public side, and it's research, it's outpatient clinics. And in this case, because the hospital also wanted to try to offset the stigma by mental health, they've included other regular clinics, like diagnostic imaging, for instance, that anybody can come to. Right? So it's a mix of different things happening.
So one of the things that we always try to instill is that ever-changing technology equals flexible design. You cannot, in 5 years, you can count on things changing technologically, and you can count that there will be big changes in a new hospital that's just been built. So the main kind of crux of what this message means is that the floor plates that anticipate change cannot be designed for specific functions for the day that they're designed. They have to anticipate that the structure grid and the expansion of the floors, the way certain adjacencies work, all allow for this kind of flexibility to happen over time very quickly without having to interrupt the whole hospital.
As somebody recently reminded everyone, is that the day you start planning the hospital to the day you're opening the door, you're going to be virtually opening a city that's already obsolete, in a way, right? So that's the challenge. How do you avoid that?
Do you want to talk about this one?
Well, this just shows some of the spaces we've done in hospitals that show a lot of this high-tech equipment. ICU room on the left, and an MRI unit. You can see the MRI on the right. MRIs in themselves, they get updated, almost every second year. Hard capacities. This is a cyberknife. Another ICU room.
So there's a video here which I will show you after. It's about new ORs and the trends in ORs, but it doesn't work on this PowerPoint. But the thing about those ORs, which we will talk to you about in a minute, is that one of the things we're doing is the new trend is to design the OR like a car interior, basically. So you have the shell, and we have now many manufacturers that can compete where it's kind of designed, it comes in as a clothing that goes into the room, specifically designed to the procedures and to the doctors that are going to be using it, and any change can happen within 24 hours. It does not need to stop the whole the whole area and close down the ORs for long periods of time to actually make renovations. And we will show you that in a minute. But just to keep going with this, the single bedrooms with private washrooms. This is a debate that we talk endlessly about with clients, and believe me, many clients have different views on it, so there isn't this kind of sort of solidarity around where they should be necessarily.
The one thing, I mean, in the States, it's almost 100% single rooms now, no matter what specialty. In Canada, we're up to about 80, because we have an insurance system that is a little different. It's not private, right? So, but it's going up and up and up. And some people are now thinking that maybe, the pendulum will, there's other issues about, for instance, some people actually like to share a room with somebody else for social interaction and also for safety. Older patients, they tend to fall and stuff like that. If they're in a room all by themselves, somebody may not notice, right? If you're with another patient, they may call the nurse. So there's a lot of debate going back and forth. And this just shows different positions for the washrooms. All the rooms have their own private washroom with a shower. And whether, how that is arranged impacts kind of the design of that room.
And the building itself.
And the building itself.
Yeah, because to put the washrooms in the middle creates wider bays. To put the washrooms on the outside creates tighter windows to the outside. To put the washrooms on the inside creates less of a connection between the nurse and the patient. So, and all of them work, just different mentalities about the layout.
The last one there. Yep.
How is it thinking of this university?
Right now we are going with this proposal here. And one of the reasons why it's a good thing at that university is, first of all, the window itself is wide enough, and we can control the amount of heat that comes through. So the patients are positioned in such a way that they have a clear view to the outside, but they don't necessarily have the huge expansion exterior. And two, the relationship between the care corridor and the room itself is much more open, so it's a little easier to manage from a staffing point of view.
I mean, the most.
The single bed.
Sorry.
Single bed.
Single bed.
All.
Yes, through that.
There are certain rooms in the towers that have multiple beds, but I would say 85% of the majority of the rooms are single.
Right. We are here in Saudi Arabia, we care about privacy too much.
Yes.
And the privacy here, it will be less, because you have windows there, it's coming, and everybody going in the corridor, he can see through. And that is always something.
Right, I mean, there's all these pros and cons, right?
All these pros and cons.
Because from a staffing and nursing point of view, they want to see the patient, right?
Right. It's important that they.
And the doctors.
Yeah.
Now the other.
So this is the base.
Right. The other interesting thing is the last one on the left at the bottom is what we call same-handed rooms, which means all the rooms. You can see the other ones are mirrored, right? They go. But the last one is same-handed, so all the rooms are identical.
This one.
And anybody who's, I guess, done medical training knows that there's a protocol of which side of the patient you're supposed to approach. So there are studies, right? There are very recent studies that actually prove that the single-handed room reduces medical errors, for instance.
How many square meters you need for each room?
Including the washroom, I would say about 28.
Yeah.
The washroom is quite big because it has to be wheelchair accessible.
And the universal rules for wheelchairs have gone up now, so the washroom is much bigger than it used to be.
Excuse me? For the chosen, one choosing for this project, it is the farthest distance between the bed and the toilet. Have you studied this issue of
The distance between
the bed and the toilet? For the chosen.
This
For the
one?
adult, yes. For the adult, the toilet is very new.
right. That's one of the disadvantages, right? Because in that one you do have to actually cross the room. Right. But you have to weigh all the different.
That's the way all
So
of
that's not it.
Right.
So you're catching on every single plan has good and bad things.
Right.
And so again, the care that one takes to make sure that the patients, when they're staying there for a long time, they have a great view. There's a sense of detail in the room that gives them a sense of home. how to hang your clothes in the room, how to keep certain things, personal things, is all part of the story of designing these spaces. This, for example, a patient wall opposite a bed. And this was a study we did for the mental health hospital that we just finished designing. So again, it's showing that the area of the window is a special place to be because it has a great view. So there's a desk attached to it, some thinking about that. And the bed does not need to be a park bed here, so it's a little bit different than some other photos. And this is, for example, sick kids. So at sick kids, one of the things is parents stay overnight. So this couch, for example, is made to be a bed. So in fact, we designed this together, and I slept many days because my daughter was very ill for a long time. And so we put drawers underneath the couch, you pull it out, they're laundered sheets, you put them on, and you can actually sleep comfortably the night and be near your child, and so the parents can take turns. And the child is much better because if you're not with the child, the nurses have to administer the drugs typically, and there's an anxiety about it, and the day goes very, very directly and give a sense of space and scale to the whole thing. This is the view from the top, and these are the train sheds, the old train sheds, which are historical, so we couldn't tear them down. So we only took the central portion as it relates to the main building, and then we've greened the whole roof of this existing station to create a park. So rather than being this ugly gray area that was huge in square meters, it's now a beautiful park with a kind of an art object that hangs over the station that you can see from all around. This is an educational project, an experimental one that we just opened, and essentially it's a student kind of center where there's a lot of interactive studies that happen, sometimes given by the faculty, but sometimes it's actually students themselves collaborating and so forth. So it was an important kind of space to be owned by the students in the university and feel like this is their home, and they can work wherever they want, and they can create groups and work on projects and so forth. So it's meant to be a kind of a although there are instructional spaces, it meant to be a hands-off, owned by the students, and we included green walls inside the building to actually, again, students will be studying there for hours on end, so to have a nice place to be in. And then we've also created roof gardens, and there's again, this is a sustainable building with green roof and some decks so that during the inclement weather they can actually use. Other projects like this one is a huge educational institution for York University, and it's basically an art school, a dance school, and a theater school, all into one. And so it's important to create, for example, this is the lobby of the theaters where they actually do the student performances and invite the public from the outside, to make it in such a way that it's kind of interesting and current without using expensive materials. And these are the theaters, for example, the teaching theaters. Again, they're done in very simple materials, but are designed with the kind of dimensions to teach a lot of kids how theaters are run and all the technologies around what happens with maintaining theaters. And part of this school also has a huge body of classrooms, instructional spaces, which you see. This is the main space that connects them all. This is another university building that we are just starting to build. They've torn down the existing building, and they have a hole in the site here. It's an instructional fine arts program for a university out east in Canada. It teaches all the arts as well as theater as well. And again, you can see here the interiors of the school and how they're they're all about the students and the life of the university as it goes. So everything is built around making the students engage with the buildings that they're in and feel at home at their programs. This is a project that in a couple of days we're going to present to a client in Iran. It's a kind of a complicated site, but at the end of the day, we changed it many times over because the coverage was such that we had to keep a lot of the site open. This is by the sea here. So again, the program called for residential towers with a huge commercial center at the base of the tower, and also because people come on holiday, this is quiche, there has to be a sense of wonder, of how to spend the day, how to walk around and enjoy the site and so on. So these are conceptual drawings that just give you the sense of the scale of the project and the kind of thinking we first do when we first start thinking about it. So we're trying to sell the idea of how these are going to be organized and how going to be phased over time, and the kind of the excitement that can occur between the way the buildings meet the podium and the retail spaces and the big open spaces. You will see this idea being executed in a building just a few minutes from now, and you can see the effect of it because we've tried it before, so we're kind of duplicating the effort in this one. So again, this is this project. This is done in our office in China, and this is one of the ones that China, they promote progress, but they do it by allowing different developers to fight for the right to develop a piece of land. So what happens is that you end up as an architect doing a huge amount of proposals because everybody's vying to get the approval from the government to have the right to build it, but usually there is a time lag involved, and sometimes the finances aren't there, and so just another person takes over, and another group, and another group. But this is one of the ones that's actually moving ahead, and it's a very large project that has an office, 2 office towers and residential towers as well as a commercial base. So and this is a kind of an exploration of how the retail is going to work below and link all these things into a village on the lower levels. And this one of the proposal we did in Qatar, it's for basically a ring road around a man-made lake with something really fantastic happening in the middle in terms of entertainment and so forth. And then there is a series of residential buildings with their own addresses all around. And then there is a ring of commercial activity and public spaces that are able to be used as promenades around the water to connect to the main island. So with a special piece at the end. This is the same kind of thing, but this was built in Germany, in Cologne. This whole area was train tracks, and the city wanted to develop this and integrate it into the old city. So we've created a master plan that we won the competition for, and subsequent to that, have done all the building guidelines to build this big plaza, parking below, and 6 blocks to actually be commissioned by different architects, and we did 2 of those blocks. We created a man-made lake and residential quarters on this side. But we've done it in such a way that the seamlessness between the old and new is so natural. And at that scale, it's kind of very important. And this is what is called a media park, which means that the government was trying to encourage all the media companies to actually come, TV stations and so forth, come and live in this new institution. And this is a view of what it's like today as it's been built over time, because they built it over many years. And so this is the man-made lake. These, by the way, are the ventilating shafts from the parking below. So again, we tried to make them into kind of interesting things so that people don't see what the implications of this are. Now that's the project that I was telling you that is the quiche derivative basically made from this. We are actually building this now on the waterfront. It's so spectacular, the site, that you can't ask for better. We designed a park at the end of this big master plan, and the lake itself is right here. This is facing south, so it's got all the right locations for everything. So the idea is there is a 65-story tower and 45 with a base, but it's very nautical in a way that it's connected in such a gentle way and creates this cascading effect between the 2 buildings. And then it comes down and hovers above the street where there is a connection to the park and to the pedestrians. And you can see here the attention to the lower levels. There's a porte cochere here that you can drive in and drop people off. The two lobbies work on either side of this large thing, and a gateway to the park. Nice little gardens that animate the streets, and cascading apartments that actually take advantage of the views and so forth. And this is in Yemen, a master plan. We were commissioned to a very complicated site because it's on a hill, and we were commissioned to do a commercial center and a series of residential townhouses as well as mixed townhouses here as well. And so there was a kind of a stress to actually use very vernacular architecture. So that's why you see a lot of the buildings were actually made with the way they actually make their buildings. Something that we're doing here in Riyadh, we did the concept and the working drawings, but we're not doing the site supervision. But nevertheless, it's under construction, and it's a twisted tower, but it's very simply an office building that has a twist. And this is the actual what the lobby would be like. So this kind of gives you a general overview of of the things.
Stop.
I'm trying. Oh, here it is. Yeah.
Push at the beginning of the blue bar.
Yeah. Hang on.
Yeah, just put.
Yeah.
Anyway, this is an example of some of the latest technology. It's called intraoperative imaging, and it combines MRI, CT scanner inside the operating room. And you can see this is the MR moving into the operating to either before or after the surgery. You don't move the patient, you move the machine. So the only thing there but the machine, it weighs like, 4 tons. So you have to make sure you design for it, right? Same thing you can see here for the CT. No, that's on the other side. And it's shared between 2 rooms because these machines are several $1 million. So that's why the track. You can do 2 rooms or 3 rooms. And it's all automated. Because this is a CT scanner. Sharing, and everything is highly automated because when this happens, the room has to be cleared of all things that are not compatible, right? They have to be compatible. Tools and so on, lights. Anyway, that's just a little example. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you for the dinner. We have 20 minutes for question, please.
For the last video, what about the infection and disease between the patient when the rooms is separated by the walls? Between 2 patients.
Right. No, I mean, those doors, it's designed in such a way that those doors are totally sealed, and the air changes are such that you have to allow a certain amount of time before the room is, ready. Right? You can't do it like in an instant. It's not quite as fast as you see it on the video. Probably takes about half an hour. Right.
What are the latest for the rehabilitation of the dignity?
I didn't catch the last part.
What's the latest research or the latest design for the rehabilitation of the old people?
Oh, okay.
You mean the elder.
Right. Well, we have a sort of a transition piece which we call CCC beds, which are complex continuum care, and that is kind of an in-between step between patients that have, you know, a lot of problems when they're older, and they would be taken care of there and then go home or to a nursing home. I mean, the problem with our hospitals is that quite often older patients are not able to go home. So they're tying up beds in the hospital. So the idea is to find something for them to go to, like a CCC bed.
The master plan that we showed, one of the master plans that we showed, the second one that had the curve and linear thing, I don't know if you remember, the actual rooms were CCC beds, and the tower at the back was actually a step down. It means it would be for older people living close to the hospital for care.
In Canada, the other thing is we have a very strong push towards what we call home care. And there's a whole system set up so that people can go home, but still get, you know, medical nurses or whatever coming to the house on a daily basis, or, you know, twice a week, whatever is necessary. And that's just to keep them out of, you know, out of an institution. But it's, you know, it's part of the medical care system as well.
For designing hospitals here in Sweden, you have to take care about some minor tuning because of the culture, because of the habits of the people. You have a lot of visitors for patients here, and some visitors are female and male. So while the patient is so we have to take care to make your project successful. You have to care about the details.
Yeah, we have some people here who are helping us learn about all these things.
Yeah, because one major thing about it is privacy. Privacy in the rooms, it's very important. When you create this type of window for observing the patient and the patient, yes, this is true for patients who's ill, very ill, and you need to observe them.
Right.
But when the patient 50 or 60 or more of these patients, you don't need to observe them directly. So you need to give them the privacy. Privacy here, it is very, very, very important.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing is the family rooms, the visitation rooms and so forth, and the program here would be much higher than it would be in North America, for example, because there would be different crowds, larger crowds coming, and those would have to be accommodated.
Let me ask one question, please. How we come to this? I mean, you are starting to design the extension. How you come to the, for the program?
The program is done typically with a programmer. Essentially, it's a company that actually specializes in healthcare programming, and they would basically have extensive meetings with the governing body of the hospital. They would ask them about their procedures, about what facilities they have, what do they offer, and how much they want to grow as the anticipated growth. And then they would draft a very extensive, first it's called a master program. And a master program is extensive, but it kind of gives you global feelings of how big the new departments are going to be, how many beds, and so forth. And then once that gets approved, then there is a bigger document that comes. It's called a functional program, and that they will draft room by room requirement for the whole hospital. So by the time that the functional programming is done, the architect should be working somewhere alongside, and if they're not, they will take that program and then we'll use that to generate the new hospital because it would reflect the proper demands that were expected. So the architect doesn't engage directly in the programming, but definitely responds to the program and then how it gets laid out and what are the connections and so forth that are desired.
Yeah, but some architects, they are medical planners. And they sometimes, as you know, it's doctors, and you sit with doctors, and
yes,
it's their imagination. It is different than the reality with the architects when he's going to do the design. And sometimes the the programmer have the difficulty to take the information about the users itself. And it needs somehow the architects and the programmer to work with them in the same area where, to develop it together.
That's exactly what happens. That's what is usually recommended. That in fact, what I'm saying is that when the programmer is doing the master programming, the architect usually, this is what we preach to our clients, is that we would be doing blocking diagrams to test whether the assumptions in the master program are correct or whether they can fit, because sometimes things have to be adjusted if the sites are very tight. And then as the functional program comes, by then it's very clear where the directions is and so on. But one of the important things is that every time you make a presentation, it's important to get very strong feedback, because that's the only tool one has to actually screen the work that's been going on in progress and how to go back and change and alter to suit the needs of the people that are actually going to be using the building. So, but it's a complicated and lengthy process, but definitely a good one. I mean, it's just full of this kind of iterative process.
There's something about the interchangeability, which I started to see that in the hospital, any hospital. Well, it comes up with the preset packages for electromechanical.
That are very heavy in technology. Certain departments are not very heavy in technology, and certain parts that are like hotels. So we know that there is at least 3 kinds of spaces here. And what we need to do is to make sure that the areas that are not laden with technology, but not like hotels, are all grouped together in an area that is actually flexible, so that as programs expand and contract, they can move horizontally as well as vertically. For example, the clinics at the King Abdulaziz University, they're stacked in such a way with the adjacencies of office space, so that if there is incremental growth of 20 to 40, 50% in the clinic's demands, you don't have to make a new building, you could just expand and contract horizontally. The technical platforms they change rapidly. For example, when you say technical platform, we're talking about ER, the diagnostics, the imaging, and we're talking about the ORs. These kind of areas are very heavy, they have very heavy uses of electrical demands, mechanical demands, they're very specific about things. And it's funny that they used to be large sort of areas that actually produce procedures, but now with the technologies they're shrinking and shrinking, and there's, as Jürgen showed you, there are machines that kind of can work for several rooms and so on. So these platforms have to be designed in the same way, so that the structure can take it, so that the proximity of the mechanical spaces are close by, not remote, so that any changes in the mechanical, we're not talking about changing shafts through the whole building. And that's why we always encourage to have mechanical spaces above ORs, right? Because they're the biggest customers of mechanical spaces. So again, the grid, all those kinds of things, and the proximity of one another is going to be kind of important. So ER and imaging are usually very close together, and one can contract and one can expand depending on use. You can always have to worry about expansion, but you also have to worry about reconfiguring the interiors. If you don't need area, you just need new things. And then the towers themselves, usually there's very little change over time. The biggest debate we have is about the washroom locations. But once that's set, we cannot change that. But the delivery of care in terms of the nurses and interchange of between the staff and the patient is a very important question, as we all talked about, because once that's answered, you have to respond and keep going. But generally speaking, they kind of stay inert. They just, like, the rooms can be updated, the services in the rooms can be updated, but there is not a requirement to actually rethink necessarily the area. So these are the kind of the categories that generally happen in hospitals.
Okay, another question.
One more question?
Dr. Mohammed Al-Hussein, member of the International Committee for Green Concrete. Last month, there was the first conference about the use of natural porcelain and the green concrete.
So use of
Natural porcelain or pumice or lava. Roman engineer had used lava rock, pumice, lava powder in the Roman hospital and all the dams and projects. I have samples from Vancouver, Canada. I have from California, in Medina, in Akhal area, in Sana'a. All they have lava rock, lava powder. Lava rock in the concrete will reduce 50% of the energy, will kill fungus and bacteria and germ, save resistance for chloride and sulfate, give you sustainable development. In Arizona, there is a study about School of Public Health that sustainable development cannot be without lava. So I can help you in the future, and the project is just that also use your local or renewable material within 500 kilometers to reduce, carbon footprint and to increase durability and sustainability.
This is a very good thing you're saying, and especially in a hot climate like Saudi, it's very important to think about energy consumption and sustainability. And so, generally speaking, people think of sustainability as something that engineers come up with after you design the building, but in fact, it's the first thing that one asks when you first start designing the building. What can we do here? What is our goal as a group? Where do we want to go? And then how do we want to achieve this in the design itself so that it kind of comes in naturally into the flow? And the studies in the concrete are very interesting. We're very keen on that. You know that it's still kind of expensive to do it, so it's kind of very hard to teach.
Very cheap.
Yeah.
One ton is 20 riyal maybe, the lava rock. Here.
Yeah.
The California one, it costs 100, but here it costs more.
Yeah, and the mix, you have to get the right mix and so forth. But it's not. It's very, very commendable what you're saying. Actually,
It's approved by Saudi Specification Code, by Saudi Building Code, by Ministry of Municipality, and they done lava cement and Seaport Jeddah project, 1,000 million riyal. They make it all. They use 100% of recycled water, so they save. It will reduce heat island effect. The lava rock will save 50% of the water in irrigation. So there's many benefit from our material.
Yeah.
I have 5 samples from Vancouver, Canada, 5 color, but here we have black one.
It's very similar to in South America. They use what is it called?
They call it silat.
Yeah, which you find in the sea, and it's coral, and it's got the same properties as lava actually, and very structural. I mean, it's soft when you actually first cut it, but once it's actually in place, it's a very strong and enduring
The new design for the hospital in the King Abdulaziz University will achieve any LEED level or certificate?
Okay, this is I mean, this is something that is still being under discussion with the client as to what level of sustainability they would like to achieve. Okay. I mean, the projects that we've shown you were all gold LEED, right? So they're kind of very high. And the thing here is that in temperate climates, it's easy to, it's not easy, there's a sort of a bit of capital cost, but it's easier to achieve because there's a variation in temperatures and so forth, so it's not always like in the Arctic, and this is almost the opposite of the Arctic. So there's going to be a huge cost associated with making sustainable buildings. And so I think the big question would be to the hospital and to struggle with is, to what level they would like to achieve that, and so we would help them get there. So it's not quite defined yet. But you can see from the things that we're doing, we're already looking at sustainable measures and trying to.
Yeah, but only one concerning which we achieved or which we faced in Chaos University from HOK. It's the materials. Most of the materials import from outside of Saudi Arabia. So I hope that the new design will be based on regional materials, which is going to be one of the goals of the LEED design.
What do you mean by original materials?
Local material.
Which is what?
In
Stone.
in Saudi Arabia and Arabian Gulf, they are using microsilica from outside. It costs 1,500 per ton, but we have natural porcelain. It costs 250. All the project now in Noura or King Abdullah Palace in Riyadh, 1996, and King Khan Causeway in Bahrain, they use 50% of slag from UK. In Masdar, they are using 60% slag from Japan. But if you use our local material within 500 miles, we reduce carbon footprint, reduce shipping, and we will benefit our local people, not other ones.
Interesting.
Okay, please. Last subject.
Do you consider using the ICF plot for the university?
Sorry,
The ICF block is a polyester. It's a Canadian invention. It's a polyester block finished in concrete, reinforced concrete, and then you use it to build the walls, so you get the isolation and surface energy.
Okay, well, okay, now I'm understanding what you're saying. Well, it all depends on, I mean, I don't know that at this stage we can say that that's, I mean, the thing is that the main structure of this hospital probably should be done in concrete, and because of the structural grid, and because of this, we worry about ceilings, so we get flat slabs going, two-way slabs and so forth. So once that's done, the rest of the walls that actually make up will be infill block walls, and then there will be a sophisticated screen on the outside that will create the thermal barrier that will be required. So at this stage, at this conceptual stage, it's a little bit too early because again, I think the points about being sustainable and using local is good. So we haven't gotten that far yet down the line with this, but I think these are all things that are on the table to actually consider.
Last question.
One question regarding the growth in the population and the education as well. We have all this problem. I'm working in the university. Problem with expansion and extension, the flexibility in the do you have anything in this direction?
Well, are you talking about the King Abdullah University or just in general?
The project directorate.
Okay. Okay, well, the flexibility, I mean, first of all, the amount of square meters that's going to be built is humongous. So this should, I mean, this should carry the growth factor for at least another 35, 40 years. It's just, it's a phenomenal scale, talking about 800 beds, 250,000 square meters. So it's not a small project. So, and there is enough fat in the building to actually be able to do a lot of growth without necessarily expansion. So
do you have that standard, something organized in the society? That's why we always have the problem of if there is a solution for the open and flexible change.
yeah, and I think that's what we try to, in these three categories, we try to keep it very open, and keep them horizontals, not so many floors, so that there isn't this kind of problem with the vertical connections. So all the clinics are only on 3 floors, and all the technical bases on 2 floors. So it's very easy to kind of expand horizontally in there and change departments and so forth. But the building is landlocked, but there's so much building that I don't think you need to go outside the envelope because it already will provide a huge service.
Okay, finally, thank you, Zilda Consultant, by name of Engineering Committee in Jeddah Chamber and Saudi Oman Society. Thank you very much for all. Finally, سمحتوا في عندنا النشرة هنا في الملتقى الاندستري اللي يحصل على حضور المنطقة يحصل على مستوى في تعليق أخير من المستشفيات.